1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 3. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Welcome to our Tuesday, May 27, 2025 study. This is our 10th study in Isaiah, and we're starting Isaiah chapter 10 tonight. Are we going to get through the whole chapter? I highly doubt it. It's 34 verses, but we'll see what we can do. Verse 1. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed, to turn aside the needy from judgment, and to take away the right from the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. I'm thinking right there, the context, as we talked about before, the near fulfillment of this is with the Assyrians coming into Judah, and they will be doing a lot of destruction. And then there's sort of a reprieve, and then later on, after Hezekiah, after Manasseh, you get down there, and now there's the Babylonian captivity after Assyria is taken over by the Babylonians. But that is a type of how during the first coming of the Antichrist, he is called the Assyrian, and he will be setting up. Basically what he does there as the Assyrian is he sets up the Mosaic law. He makes a 7-year covenant with the nation of Israel. Daniel 9:27 says. And during that first 3.5 years, he sets up the Mosaic law, gets them to follow that. Halfway through the tribulation period, he is killed by the 2 witnesses, probably. And then Revelation 13 says he is resurrected as a beast. When he is resurrected, he is the one world ruler. In fact, let's look at that to give you an idea of what's going on. Go over to Revelation 17. Revelation chapter 17. We've talked about how the near fulfillment of this is in type is that Judah goes into Assyria, does a lot of destruction there, and then it's later on that they are in Babylonian captivity by Nebuchadnezzar. And for the tribulation period, you've got Assyria, the Assyrian, the Antichrist, and the first half of the tribulation period being a regional king over Israel and that area there for 3.5 years. And then once he's killed by the 2 witnesses, then 3 days later he is risen from the dead. How about that? A mock type of Jesus Christ risen from the dead by Satan. And he is risen as the beast. And then he rules the entire world. And he does so from Israel. And he forsakes the Holy Covenant, the Mosaic Law, and he goes to a one world religion type rule, worshiping the God of forces. So Revelation 17 and verse 10. Actually, you'll see with the beast, with the woman Babylon, you'll see, if you look in verse 3, Revelation 17, verse 3, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Revelation 17:3. She has 7 heads, 10 horns. If you go to Revelation 13, looking at the beast for that last half of the tribulation period, Revelation 13, verse 1. Revelation 13, verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. The reason for the 7 heads and the 10 horns is that the first half of the tribulation period, the Antichrist is ruling as the Assyrian, an Assyrian Jew, using the Mosaic Law covenant, and he is over the Israel and that regional area there. And then, so that's one of 7 regional rulers. There are 6 other regional rulers in the rest of the world. And then for the last half of the tribulation period, when he's resurrected as the beast, he is now typified by Babylon, and he is the one world ruler, and he has 10 kings under him ruling different regions underneath the Antichrist. So you've got 7 kings, regional kings in the first half of the tribulation period. Then you have 10 regional kings in the second half with the Antichrist ruling over them. So that's why there are the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So in Revelation 17 and verse 9, Revelation 17:9, here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, and there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So Revelation 17, verses 10 through 13. That's what I'm going to write over here in our to start Isaiah 10. Revelation 17, 10 through 13. And it tells you there 7 kings. So 7 kings, first half of trib. And I'm going to say Antichrist, 1 of 7. Then you've got, so it says there are 7 kings in verse 10 there, Revelation 17:10. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. The other that is not yet come is basically the Antichrist has been killed. This is a view right in the middle of the tribulation period. The Antichrist has been killed by the 2 witnesses, probably. But he has not... I say he's been killed for sure, but I say probably that the 2 witnesses kill him. I can't say that for certain. That's just a guess, educated guess. So when it says he is not, the other is not yet come, that is the Antichrist is one of the 7. He's killed halfway through the tribulation period, and then he is resurrected as the beast by Satan. Revelation 13, verse 1. And so then Revelation 17:11, the beast that was, so he was the Antichrist, the man of sin in the first half of the tribulation period, and is not, because he's killed by the 2 witnesses. Even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. So he's of the 7, one of the 7 regional kings. But now he goeth into perdition. And then he's going to be raised up, the son of perdition, raised up by Satan as the beast, giving him more power and more understanding dark sentences of black magic and all that jazz. And so he is of the 7, but he's called the 8th because he's somehow different. He's like a cyborg, I guess you could say. You know, Jesus is fully God and fully man. He is fully God and fully man. No was about it. Jesus is fully God and fully man. The beast is man and beast. He's not God, so he's beast instead, which is what which was what Satan is anyway. Because Satan is a cherub, the anointed cherub that covered God's throne, Ezekiel 28, and they are called beasts, one of the 4 beasts. And so he is one of those. So, so then he makes the Antichrist in his own image. It's like God made Jesus in his own image. Okay, so The beast was and is not even, he is the 8th and is of the 7th. So he shows you it's like a new creature, but this is the new creature that is a beast and man, not God and man. And then it says, verse 12. So Revelation 17, I'm writing my notes. 7 kings, first half of trib, Antichrist, 1 of 7. Beast, Antichrist, 1 world ruler for last half of trib. And then 10 kings rule under him. And I'm going to write here for the 7 kings, the first half, Assyrian. And then for the last half, I'm going to write Babylonian. Assyrian and Babylonian. And so you saw there that the 10 horns and the 10 kings, and they give their power to the beast. So he is the one world ruler with the 10 kings under him. Okay, so that's good background for where we are. So Isaiah 10 and verse 1, woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed. The grievousness, if you go to Matthew 23, look at Matthew 23. Talking about the religious leaders. The whole chapter is an indictment by Jesus against the religious leaders. And he says in verse 2, Matthew 23, 2, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit at Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. In other words, they're going to give you the Mosaic law, but you don't want to follow after their works because they're really following the devil. They just have a form of godliness. And then what they do, it says in verse 4, they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne. That's what I wanted you to see. Matthew 23, verse 4, they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne. And Isaiah 10, verse 1 says, woe unto them to decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed. So I'm going to write grievousness here, and I'm going to put Matthew 23 and verse 4. And then when it talks about they're supposed to be teaching the Mosaic law, but then, and I mean they have parts of it, but if you look down further in Matthew 23, he says in verse 23, Matthew 23, 23, woe unto you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. So basically what they do is they pick and choose the laws that they like. And so then they follow those. And so then you think they're holy because they're pointing and say, hey, look at this, we're following Scripture, we're obeying God. But then when you're not looking in the background they're doing bad stuff. And the bad stuff they're doing far outweighs the little good stuff they do. Because, okay, they don't mind paying tithe of their spices. I mean, really, how much is that? How many spices do you have? Maybe you have a spice rack and you have jars of spices. So you pay 1/10 of that. Not a great loss to you, is it? A lot of people, I think I bought Lana a spice rack when we first got married. I don't think she ever used a complete bottle of any one spice in 11 years of marriage. So you give 1/10 of your spice away, it's not a huge loss. Okay, but if you omit judgment, mercy, and faith, well, they don't want to do that stuff because then they're losing. That's dipping into their pocketbooks, and they don't like that. So giving away some of the spices, that's fine, but giving away a good portion of their money, which they're gouging the people with, no, they're not going to do that. So you see, that's what the Antichrist does, is he has them follow the Mosaic law, but it's the parts that he likes as a form of godliness. And then he's doing injustice in the side. And if you look over in So that was Matthew 23:23. So I'm going to write prescribed. I'm going to say, so Matthew 23 verse 4 and verse 23 is the grievousness. And then what they have prescribed, we're going to go over to Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7. And Jesus says, well, they do the washing of pots and all this stuff. But he says in verse 7, howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandment of God, ye hold the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cups, and many other such like things ye do. And he said unto them, full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition. And verse 13 says, they make the word of God of none effect through their tradition. So I'm going to write Mark 7, 7 through 9. So back in Isaiah 10 and verse 1, woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees. That would be the omitting the judgment, mercy, and faith. Matthew 23:23. And that write grievousness. Matthew 23 verse 4, they bind heavy burdens grievous to be borne. They won't lift them with their finger. Which they have prescribed. So that's where I wrote Mark 7, 7 through 9. So they prescribe, they make it tough on everybody while trying to make it easy on themselves, while trying to get the money and the power from the people. And so it's important that, it looks like they're following God's commandment, but Mark 7, 7 through 9 says, no, you reject the commandment of God to keep your own tradition. And there are some parts of the Mosaic Law that you keep, but that's just to have this form of godliness and to get people to follow you. And so that is what the Antichrist and his forces will do as well. So, woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed, to turn aside the needy from judgment, and to take away the right from the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. So they do that by their programs that they have. They're giving things. I mean, the tithe was required. The tithe was required in the Mosaic Law, but they added other stuff too. It's like Peter. They came to Peter. They didn't go to Jesus about it because they knew Jesus knew the law. So the religious leaders go to Peter. Well, doesn't your master pay the temple tax? And of course Peter's like, well, of course he pays the temple tax. He follows the law. He doesn't sin. He pays that tax. And then Jesus tells Peter, says, we're not supposed to pay that. But you already said I do, so go. And then he ends up getting a fish. He tells him go fish and find the fish. And when the fish comes up, there'll be a coin in there, and he'll use the coin to pay the temple tax. But that's just a point, is that according to the Mosaic Law, temple tax, there's no temple tax for the Jews to pay there. But yet, Peter doesn't know that. Why? Because they're teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. Apparently, the religious leaders have taught the Jews that they need to pay the temple tax. And so when they ask Peter, he's like, oh yeah, of course. But then Jesus basically says, well, that's not what the law says. In other words, they made that up so they can get more money. And so, they try to get and so they take it from the widows and the fatherless. Those are the ones that in your Old Testament, it says that you're supposed to take care of those specially. The widows and the fatherless, they don't have, you look at, for example, Ruth. Ruth was a widow in the times of Judges. And the law says that if you have a field and with food and everything, you harvest it, and there's going to be some parts of it that is harder to get to, take more work to get to. And in that case, you're supposed to just leave that alone and let the poor people to come, what they call gleaning, where they would come and get that food. Now, it's harder to get that particular food than it is for the stuff they already picked up. But that's okay, because the poor, they need food. And so then they would go and glean the field, which is a wonderful thing, because what do we do in this society? The poor people, they just get welfare checks. You just throw money their way. And then they're just sitting around and they don't do anything. But in a society like that, where you've got food, well, then you say, okay, you want to eat? Well, go pick it. And you look at Ruth, she was gleaning the field. So she's poor, she's a widow, and they don't just throw a check her way, but they make her work hard. And nothing wrong with making people work hard. And as a result, she got food to survive on. So, I mean, she's not rich, but she's surviving, and she's not lazy sitting around. We wouldn't have the big drug problem that we have in the U.S. today if people just didn't get on welfare and get some big fat check and unemployment and all that. Instead, they made them do work like that. You know, when FDR started, my grandfather benefited from that. Where's he going to work, you know? They had the CCC camp, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they had all these trails that they built and roads that they built, and it's a lot of hard work, and you're not going to get rich, but you're going to survive. And my grandfather was part of that. So you know, they had projects and to where they actually had to work. People didn't have unemployment was high coming out of the Great Depression. You give them a job, and you know, it's hard work, but you can survive. But now we just write checks. Anyway, well, beyond that, they just go to their bank accounts, I guess. But anyway, beyond that, the point is here that you didn't have that in Israel at that time. Widows and the fatherless, they didn't take care of them. They were getting money from them because they wanted to be rich. Look in James chapter 2. Again, James chapter 2. And this is specifically talking about the tribulation period for Israel. Verse 1, James 2:1, my brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respect of persons. For if there come unto your assembly a man with a gold ring in goodly apparel, and there come in also a poor man in vile raiment, and ye have respect to him that weareth the gay clothing, and say unto him, sit thou here in a good place, and say to the poor, stand thou there, or sit here under my footstool, are ye not then partial in yourselves, and are become judges of evil thoughts? So there's a contrast between the rich and the poor, and they treat the rich better. And that's what religion does. The founder of the Salvation Army, William Booth, was a ordained Methodist priest, or pastor, whatever they called him. And he was bringing in the poor people into the Methodist church, and they didn't like that. You know, because a big problem at that time in mid-1800s in England, London, England, was a lot of poor people living on the streets and being drunk because it got so cold in the winter. They would drink alcohol to try to stay warm through the night. So you had a lot of drunkards that didn't smell too good, and so William Booth brought them into the church, and they didn't like that. So then, what William Booth is, he ends up starting the Salvation Army, and he gets all these old army uniforms, and so they'll at least have clothes. He got them cheap, so that way they could at least have clothes to wear. And he says, well, now you know, you're part of the Salvation Army, you know. So but you know, he's helping out the poor. But here you see what man usually does, especially when you think of the Antichrist in that last half of the tribulation period. If you don't take the mark of the beast, you can't buy or sell. And so, and for Revelation 14:9 through 11, if you do take the mark, you'll have your place in the lake of fire. And so, a lot of the believers aren't going to take the mark, so then they're going to be poor. And so, if you're going to respect anybody, poor or rich, you should probably respect the poor person, because it means he's a Bible believer. The rich man, how did he get rich? Well, he probably took the mark, so he could participate in the economic system. Or if you're in the first half of the tribulation period, he at least aligned himself with the Antichrist. We talked last time about how what the Antichrist does is like that pyramid scheme. And if you're one of the first in that, you're at the top of the pyramid, so then you're going to get rich. And as it goes down, you need more and more people, and the lower you get down there, the less money you're going to have. And so it's sort of like what they're doing is, it's sort of like they've got that pyramid scheme going. 2 Peter 2 and Jude, the book of Jude and 2 Peter 2 talk about these people that come in and they rob the sheepfold, and they're natural brute beast made to be taken and destroyed. And they're basically coming in for their pyramid scheme, because if the more people they can get to take the mark and worship the image, or at least before that join with the Antichrist and follow his program, then the more recruits they get, then the more money they'll get, and because they'll be higher up in the pyramid scheme as they bring in more people below them. It's just like what Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons do. They come, if you say you're an atheist, they're probably not going to do much to you. They're really targeting, when it comes to door, they're really targeting Christians, because they know they're weak in doctrine, and a lot of times people aren't in the clique, in the club at church. And so they'll go door to door and they'll try to make them feel wanted, welcome. Say the Mormons, the Mormon boy, young Mormon boys. You need somebody to mow the grass? I can mow the grass. Oh, you got a lot of leaves in the gutters? I can clean that out for you. Oh, we're going to have a big get together and come to our church, and then afterward we'll have this food and everything, free food and all that. So they're real nice to you and treat you nicely. And they know, since you're weak in doctrine, they can get you in probably, as opposed to some atheists, because at least you believe there's a God, and the Mormons use a Bible, and Jehovah's Witnesses use a Bible. And so you can think of these religious leaders like that under the Antichrist. Remember, they're going to use the Mosaic Law, first half of the tribulation period. They use it to their advantage, but they still use it. And so they're thinking they come into these assemblies, and they're the ones that are more likely to follow them. And so they're going to try to get you to follow. So if they're rich, and they think, oh wow, they've done good, yeah, I want to be part of that club. And so he says, don't treat those people special. In fact, if you're going to discriminate, do the other way, treat the poor people nicer. But they treat the rich people nicer. So that was James 2, 2 and 3. And so then I'm going to write here by Isaiah 10, 2. There, James 2, verses 2 and 3. Because how do you think the widows may be their prey, and that they rob the fatherless? Well, they get those poor people, and get them to follow them, coming into the assemblies and robbing them, just sort of like the Mormons and the JWs do, and trying to get Christians, recruit them to be part of their club. And then they get you to join, then they're really robbing you of your money there, and your time, and all that. Okay, so Isaiah 10, verse 1, we saw they decree unrighteous decrees. Verse 2, they turn aside the needy from judgment, take away the right from the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. Verse 3, what will ye do in the day of visitation, and in the desolation which shall come from far? To whom will you flee for help, and where will you leave your glory? So the day of visitation, the immediate context is when Assyria comes in and does a lot of damage to Judah. He's already promised in Isaiah 7 and 8 that Syria and Israel will be destroyed by Assyria. I can't believe how much water came out of that little bottle. Anyway, so they know Syria and Israel are not going to be damaging Judah. They don't have to worry about them. But then Assyria is going to take over Syria and Israel, and then they're going to come and do some damage to Judah. But because Hezekiah has the people trust in their God, then they don't take it over. And then the Babylonians later on will take over the Assyrians, and then they'll take over Judah, and Israel will go into Babylonian captivity. So when it says, what will you do in the day of visitation, in the desolation which shall come from far? To whom will you flee for help? Where will you leave your glory? without me they shall bow down under the prisoners, and they shall fall under the slain. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. So we've talked about that. That's the 5th time that phrase is used. His anger not turned away, his hand stretched out still. In chapter 5, verse 25 was the first. The second one was chapter 9, verse 12. The third was chapter 9, verse 17. The fourth is chapter 9, verse 21. The fifth and final one is chapter 10 and verse 4. And so that represents the 5 cycles of chastisement that's found in Leviticus 26, verses 14 through 43. So 5 times his anger is not take away, his hand is stretched out still. If you go down to verse 25, Isaiah 10:25, it says, For yet a very little while, and the indignation shall cease, and mine anger in their destruction. So that's what happens there at verse 25. That's the second coming. So what you've got here in verse 4 is the tribulation period. So when it talks about the day of visitation and the desolation which shall come from far, verse 5 now talks about the Assyrian. So this is going to be the desolation coming from afar, is that first in the immediate near fulfillment is when Assyria does a lot of destruction of Judah, and ultimately when Babylon takes them into captivity. The far fulfillment is the tribulation period. And then the anger is done, verse 25, at Jesus' second coming. So I'm going to write the day of visitation. Visitation equals Assyria damaging Judah. They don't actually go into captivity. Damaging Judah. And then full fulfillment is 7-year covenant with Antichrist. 7-year covenant with Antichrist. So then it says, verse 4, Without me they shall bow down under the prisoners, and they shall fall under the slain. I think of Malachi chapter 3, that tribulation period, the 7-year covenant with the Antichrist is the tribulation period. And so I think of Malachi chapter 3, which it talks about verse 2, Who may abide the day of his coming? Who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. And then verse 3, Malachi 3:3 is a reference to the tribulation period. He shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he shall purify the sons of Levi and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness. So the purging there with fire is the tribulations that they go through, the 7 seal judgments, 7 trumpet judgments, 7 vial judgments, and of course all the stuff the Antichrist is doing as well. So Malachi 3:3 then should remind you that visitation then would be, so the 7-year covenant with Antichrist, it's called tribulation because spiritually speaking, they got to make the choice. Who do you side with, God or the Antichrist? And also because of the punishments there that God brings upon Israel. So I'm going to write a refiner's fire and Malachi 3:3 here. So what will you do in the day of visitation and desolation? So verse 4, Without me they shall bow down under the prisoners, they shall fall under the slain. So for that part there, bowing down under the prisoners, fall under the slain, that's mark and image of beast. So if they take the mark or they bow down to the image of the beast, then they'll fall under the slain. Basically, they have that time. First off, they shouldn't make a 7-year covenant with the Antichrist. But that first 3.5 years, he sort of has that form of godliness, and it appears that he is following the Mosaic law. And then halfway through, he's going to switch and become that beast, and then he's like the Babylonian. And then he has the worships the God of forces forsakes the Mosaic law. And so really they had that 3.5 years, that first 3.5 years with the Antichrist to figure out what he's up to. And say, I don't see the love of God here. I don't see him addressing sin. I see him in this pyramid scheme, getting people to join his religion to get rich and then get other people to join and keep, expanding it that way. I see him forsaking the truth. And yeah, he has his few verses that he brings out there, but that just fits his agenda. He's not really going by what the Bible says. He's just going a few verses to trick you, the deceivableness of unrighteousness. And so if they're without me, if they haven't believed the gospel of the kingdom, then they won't have the spiritual discernment to see this, and then they will bow down under the prisoners, they shall fall under the slain, meaning they will take the mark and bow down to the image of the beast. Verse 5, then, O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger. So that is near fulfillment. That's the guy who defeats Syria and Israel. Israel goes into Assyrian captivity, and then they go against Judah. Isaiah 37, Sennacherib there. They'll go against Judah. They won't defeat them because they'll trust in God under Hezekiah, but they'll do a lot of damage, and then finally the Babylonians will take over, defeat the Assyrians, and then Judah will go into Babylonian captivity. And so that's a type of that first half of that tribulation period. You have your chance. Choose God. So that when the Babylonian reign comes, the last half, and he wants you to take the mark and bow down to the image, you won't do it. So I'm writing here, Assyrian equals Antichrist, first half. First half of tribulation. And of course it's the same guy in the last half, but he's the beast there. He has more power. He understands dark sentences. He shows his true colors, forsaking the covenant, because now Satan has given him power over the whole world, and so then he worships the god of forces and does the black magic stuff. So Isaiah 10 and verse 5, O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. So think of mine indignation being God's wrath poured out, like through the tribulation period. If you look, mine indignation, I'm going to say, since this is the first half of the tribulation period, mine indignation equals, if you go over to Revelation 6, if you go to Revelation chapter 6, you've got the 7 seal judgments, then you have the 7 trumpet and the 7 vial after that. Vial, V-I-A-L, vial judgments and vials. Not V-I-L-E. Although it's all pretty vile, I guess. Anyway, Revelation 6, the first seal judgment is Satan in verse 2 on a white horse. He's given a crown, which is Israel, and he goes forth to conquer the other nations. The second one is second seal, verse 4. There's power given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. There was given unto him a great sword. Then verse 5, there's the prosperity of a lot of food and everything, so people will follow this Antichrist. And then in the fourth seal, the fourth beast, in verse 8, power is given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and with the beast of the earth. So Revelation 6, 1 through 8 are the first 4 seal judgments, and that's the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period. So mine indignation equals first 4, so I'm writing first 4 seals. Revelation 6, 1 through 8. And also mentioned a parallel passage to that, that's called the beginning of sorrows, in Matthew 24. Matthew 24, starting in verse 5 and through 8. So 5 through 8. So I'm also writing Matthew 24, verses 5 through 8. So, God uses this man, the man of sin, the Antichrist, as he allows him to make a 7-year covenant with the nation of Israel, and so that he can do these things, kill a fourth part of the people, conquer these other nations, and those first 4 sealed judgments that you see, Revelation 6, 1 through 8, wars and rumors of wars and those things. He allows those things to happen as a way of God chastising his people Israel so that they may believe. Because remember in verse 4, without me they shall bow down. So he chastises them so that when the time comes, when the mark and the image of the beast are instituted halfway through the tribulation period, then they will have learned their lesson from being punished in the first half and not take the mark, not bow down to the image. At least that's the idea there. So that makes him the staff in their hand is mine indignation. So now verse 6, I will send him against an hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge, to take the spoil, to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. So that is, the hypocritical nation is the one who says they had that form of godliness. They say they serve God, and we went over that, the first part of this chapter here, about they tithe their spices, but they omit the weightier matters of the law. They seem like they're following God with their washing of pots and those things, but they reject the commandment of God that they may keep their own tradition. And so they take on God's name, but they're really not serving God. So hypocritical nation, a good reference, I think, is the judgment of them is seen if you go to Matthew chapter 7, verse 22. Many will say to me in that day, Matthew 7, verse 22, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? In thy name have cast out devils, in thy name done many wonderful works. And then while I profess unto them, I never knew you, depart from me, ye that work iniquity. I think of the Catholics. They using God's name, Jesus' name all the time. And they say things in his name. I mean, the Pope will say something that will say, you know, this is the new law, this is the new decree or something. And they do it in God's name. Cast out devils. They do exorcisms. They've even got a chief exorcist, you know, somebody that's got that title somewhere. I forget. I think it's up in Indianapolis. There's some priest up there. He's like called Roman Catholic chief exorcist or something. So they're casting out devils and then do many wonderful works. Supposedly they do all these wonderful works. And then he says, then will I profess unto them, I never knew you, depart from me, ye that work iniquity. So that's what the Antichrist forces do. They say, they make the 7-year covenant. They say we're going to obey the Mosaic law. They obey parts of it, but then they omit the weightier parts, and they're really following money, is what they're doing. So Matthew 7, 22 and 23, then I'm going to write here as a reference. Matthew 7, 22 and 23 would be the hypocritical nation. So Isaiah 10, verse 6, I will send him against an hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge, to take the spoil, to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Remember from Isaiah 8, and I was hoping I never have to say this name again, but Maharshala Hashbaz, and what that means is quickly to the spoil. And what that basically means is that the spoil is going to be the Jews there, and God is going to use, he says, O Syrian, one of mine indignation. He's going to use that wrath against the hypocritical nation to get, to take the spoil, to take the prey, to tread them down like the mire of the streets. So basically, to get people saved is the idea there. You think of, like, I mentioned before, like with cancer, someone who never would believe the gospel. Atheist, wouldn't go to church, wouldn't listen to any of that. Now they're given terminal cancer and they got 3 months to live. Well, now, maybe they'll listen to what you say. Maybe they'll believe the gospel. They're going through that trial because they trust in their flesh. But when they see their flesh is going to fail them, well, then now they're looking toward the spiritual. And they say, okay, maybe there's something that's behind this gospel that you talk about. And then they trust in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as atonement for their sin. And now they have eternal life. You can think of the tribulation that God brings through the Assyrian. That's why he calls them the rod of mine anger, the staff in their hand is mine indignation. Quarter of the world is killed in that fourth seal. There's the second seal, there are people killed there. The third seal is a lot of food is real cheap. And so then they can, it looks like that's, he's the one to trust in. But then he comes in for the kill. And so by doing that, then what he's doing, he says, will I give him a charge to take the spoil, this is verse 6, and to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Basically, the spoil and the prey there is, remember, Mahar Shala Hashbaz, quickly to the spoil. It's the idea that when the Assyrian comes in, there's that opportunity to get people saved, to get the gospel of the kingdom to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You have the opportunity for the person with terminal cancer to get the gospel and be saved. Now here, when a quarter of the world, and that's significant, when a quarter of the world's population, right now you have 8 billion people, that'd be 2 billion people killed. I mean, when COVID hit, they were just raising Cain all over the world and shutting everything down because of the deaths there. That's nothing compared to a fourth of the world being killed. It's going to be the greatest number of population killed ever until you get to the vial judgment, where another same number of people are going to be killed again, to where half of the world is killed. And it's then a sign that, you shouldn't trust in the things of this world. And so this is a way for God to take the spoil. He's going to be quickly to the spoil. And he's going to basically find the remnant, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And now they're going to believe the gospel of the kingdom, not trust in uncertain riches, not trust in the things of this world when they see those 4 seal judgments in the first half of the tribulation period. So spoil. So I'm going to say spoil equals believing remnant. A lot of times we don't think of it in that terms, but like Jesus says over there in 1 Peter, I think it is. 1 Peter 5. Or maybe it's 2 Peter 3. Second Peter 3 verse 10. 2 Peter 3:10, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. The night is the tribulation period. The night is when Satan is at its peak through the Antichrist. He's got the whole world following his policy of evil. So the Lord comes in the darkness at the end of the tribulation period. He turns off the lights. The sun turns into, what does it say, Matthew 24, immediately after the days of that tribulation period, Matthew 24, verse 29. Matthew 24:29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. He comes as a thief in the night. He turns off all the lights because he's going to go and steal away believing Israel from the Antichrist and from Satan and from that Babylonian religious system. He's going to come and steal them away. Quickly to the spoil, Maharshala Hashbaz, means I'm coming as a thief in the night, and I'm going to come, and the spoil is going to be the believing remnant that I'm going to steal away from Satan. Another verse Talking about that, Matthew 13, Jesus, or Matthew 12. And Matthew 12, Jesus says in verse 29, Matthew 12:29, or else how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house? The strong man is Satan. Jesus bound Satan by his death, burial, and resurrection. Colossians 2:15 says he triumphed over principalities and powers, triumphing over them. He spoiled he says he spoiled principalities and powers, triumphing over them in the cross. So I am going to write here, by the spoil here in the believing remnant, I'm going to write Matthew 12. The references we covered here, Matthew 12:29. I'm going to write 2 Peter 3. 2 Peter 3, verse 10. And I'm going to write Colossians 2:15. So all of them coming together. So when it says in Isaiah 10 and verse 6 that I will send him against a hypocritical nation, against the people of my wrath, while I give him a charge to take the spoil and take the prey and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. It is, I'm going to spoil that hypocritical nation, and I'm going to steal away my believing remnant. First, he does it not physically but spiritually by getting them to believe the gospel of the kingdom so they don't take the mark, they don't worship the image of the beast. And then he does it physically at the end of the tribulation period at his second coming. Okay, verse 7, Isaiah 10 verse 7. So he says, in verse 5, this Antichrist, the Assyrian, is the rod of mine anger. But, the Assyrian, he's on the devil's side. He is called the son of perdition. He's called the man of sin. He's not some holy, just, godly man. Okay, verse 7, howbeit he meaneth not so, neither doth his heart think so. But it is in his heart to destroy and cut off nations, not a few. So basically what God says is, I'm going to use this Antichrist, and he's going to bring about these tribulations and these deaths and all this stuff. And it will show that he is not of God. He's following Satan's lie program. So those who are looking for the truth then will believe the gospel of the kingdom, and they'll be saved. So that's quickly to the spoil. Maharshal Hashbaz, I'm going to come and spiritually speaking steal them away. And physically I'm going to steal them away at the end of the tribulation period. And that's what I'm using the Antichrist to do. To pour my wrath through the 4 seal judgments here at first, the first half of the tribulation period. Pour my wrath upon the hypocritical nation, Israel, who has this form of godliness, so that the believing remnant comes out of that. And then he says in verse 7, the Antichrist, that's not his goal. The Antichrist doesn't come in and say, hey, I'm going to make a 7-year covenant with Israel so I can get people saved. No, it says he's just power hungry. His desire is to destroy and cut off nations, not a few. And he will succeed in that temporarily, because halfway through the tribulation period, he then becomes the one world ruler. You notice in the first seal judgment, Revelation 6, it's Satan on that white horse, and he's given a crown. And he goes forth to conquering and to conquer. So he's given the crown of Israel, and he's going to go and conquer all the other nations, so that halfway through the tribulation period, he can give those nations to the Antichrist. I know Satan is the god of this world. And so he has that, the nations are his right now, and they were his in Luke 4 at Jesus coming, first coming. But God has a lot of power on this earth through the body of Christ, because the Holy Ghost is indwelling all of us. And so there's a shift, when the rapture takes place. So he's got to go forth and conquer there. So howbeit he meaneth not so, neither does heart think so. So verse 7, it's Antichrist wants power, is all I'm going to write there. Antichrist wants power. For he saith, are not my princes altogether kings? So that's a transition there. In the first half of the tribulation period, he is the ruler in Israel, that regional area there, the Middle East. He's Assyrian. He's probably Islamic as well. So he is that ruler in that Middle Eastern area for the first half of the tribulation period. So he has princes. And basically when it says altogether kings, basically that's a signal where the princes, regional ruler in first half, so I'm going to write princes equals regional ruler in first half. And then I'm going to write kings equals world ruler in second half. So I've got princes equals regional ruler in first half of tribulation period, and then kings equals world ruler in second half. So you see he's going in verse 7 to cut off, to destroy and cut off nations, not a few. And then basically he's saying in verse 8, well, my prince is here. You know, I'm ruling the regional area here of the Middle East. So I have princes under me. But they should really be kings of nations, and I'm just going to conquer the whole world. And so he says, are not my princes altogether kings? Is not Calno as Carchemish? Is not Hamath as Arpad? Is not Samaria as Damascus? So basically he's doing what I'm talking about. He's trying to expand his power. Verse 10, as my hand hath found the kingdoms of the idols, and whose graven images did excel them of Jerusalem and of Samaria, shall I not, as I have done unto Samaria and her idols, so do to Jerusalem and her idols? So the near fulfillment is the Assyrian, when he first comes in, will take Israel into Assyrian captivity. But he won't be able to take Judah and Jerusalem into Assyrian captivity. They end up going into Babylonian captivity later on under Nebuchadnezzar. And so he's talking about that. Well, can I do that to Jerusalem and her idols like I did to Samaria? In the tribulation period, what ends up happening is in that first half, and this is what keeps him. He's like that Assyrian, and in the last half, he's like the Babylonian. So if you look at the look in 2 Thessalonians 2. Look at 2 Thessalonians 2. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day of Christ, shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. There's the term son of perdition. And remember, we saw in Revelation 17 that he goeth into perdition halfway through the tribulation period. So when he comes out as the beast, he is the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. So he opposeth and exalted himself above all that is called God. So what's all that is called God? All the religions, all the idols. You see, what goes on in like the world religions, Islam, Judaism, Churchianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism, they all see that there is a God, or Hinduism, Buddhism, they have multiple gods. But basically they see God or a God force. And they have their way of reaching that God. They have their rules and regulations that you need to follow to reach that God. And that ultimately is the idolatry. You see the physical idolatry in the Old Testament, you know, temples to Moloch and Baal and Milcom the different Dagon for the Philistines. You have all those different idols that they worshipped, all the different gods. And each nation, each religion has their own way. They're all really Baal worship, they're all Satan worship, but they all have their different names to it, different nuances on how they do it to these religions. What the Antichrist does is, he says there, he opposeth and exalted himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. In other words, what you have in these world religions, they don't serve the true God. They have their idols and they serve their gods. The difference with the Antichrist is he says, I don't give stock to any of those world religions, because he says, I am God. I am the one you should worship. He sees himself as God. But he knows, because the devil is working with him, he knows that the true God is the one that has made Israel. Middle wall partition being back up when the Israel's program resumes, is that what he's got to do is he's got to defeat, in his thinking anyway, defeat the God of Israel. Because the God of Israel is the true God. So if he can defeat the God of Israel, then he is above all. So then it says, he opposeth and exalted himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So if the God of Israel is the one true God, if he can overthrow that God, God is in the temple in Israel's program. So if he can overthrow the true God, then he becomes the true God. So what he does is, the beginning of the reason he makes a 7-year covenant with Israel to start the tribulation period isn't because he thinks Judaism is right and then halfway through he changes his mind. Rather, what he does, and I think I'm going to need some more bookmarks here, he worships the God of forces. You look in Daniel 11. Look over in Daniel 11. Daniel 11, it says in verse 31, arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, shall take away the daily sacrifice, they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So that's the image of the beast. That happens halfway through the tribulation period. And then when he does that, then it says in verse 36, the king shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. So it's through the end of the tribulation period that he's able to do that, the last 3.5 years. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god. For he shall magnify himself above all. See, that's the thing. The whole time he believes he is God. And so he just uses Israel because he recognizes that's the true God. It's sort of like in the South here, college football, at least when Nick Saban was the coach. Alabama was the superpower. And it's like the idea is, if you can beat Alabama, if you're a college football team and you can beat Alabama, then you're the best. So everybody is gunning for them. And it's just like anything, Boston Celtics, they were champs last year, so the Knicks beat them. The Dodgers, champs last year, everybody's going to try to beat the Dodgers this year. You gun for the best, because then if you beat the best, then you're the best, is the idea. So what the Antichrist does is he says, I'm God. I'm the best. I'm above all. So what do you got to do to show that? You got to beat the best, the God of Israel. So he makes a 7-year covenant with Israel so he can beat the best. They say, keep your friends close, your enemies closer. Well, the God of Israel is enemy number 1 for the Antichrist. So he keeps him closer by making a 7-year covenant with Israel. And then 2 Thessalonians 2 says he's going to get in that temple, declare himself to be God. And so he speaks against the God of gods. Now Daniel 11:37, neither shall he magnify himself above all. Verse 38, but in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Then shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. So he thinks he's the God of all gods and above all. But when you are a man made a little lower than the angels, you aren't God. And so you could declare yourself to be God, but man always worships something or somebody. And so for the Antichrist, even though he says he's God of all gods, his God is the God of forces. So he's going to use dark sentences, witchcraft, and the things. So he's going to use the satanic power, basically, to do all these wonderful things, working wonders. When I say wonderful, I don't mean great. I mean doing wonders, miraculous, supernatural things, doing supernatural things. Okay, but he first makes the covenant with Israel. And he doesn't sit, it says he sits in that temple and declare himself to be God. He does that when he gets the abomination of desolation in the temple. And he doesn't do that until halfway through the tribulation period. And the reason for that is because the first half, God doesn't allow it to happen. He gives Israel a reprieve so they can see how bad he is, because he doesn't want the eternal security program of Satan, taking the mark, worshiping the image of the beast, to be implemented until Israel has yet another chance, and a long list of chances throughout their history, that first half of the tribulation period. And so what he does, and I need a lot more bookmarks, Revelation chapter 11 now, and I'm going to write all this stuff in as well. Revelation 11, it says in verse 3, Revelation 11 verse 3, I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. 1,260 days, 3.5 prophetic years. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues, and often as they will. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. So what happens is, the reason the Antichrist can't get in that temple is for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period, God has the two witnesses standing out there. And anybody who comes against the two witnesses, kill with fire. It says, if any man come against them, hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. However they try to do it, they're going to be killed in the same manner. So you look at the beast. When he ascends out of the bottomless pit, his deadly wound was healed. So what happened was that finally, basically for 3.5 years, the Antichrist tries to get into that temple to declare himself to be God, to set up the image of the beast and get everybody to worship him. And if he does that, he figures, then I have beaten the best. I have beaten the God of Israel, and so now I have shown that I am God of all gods. So that's why he makes a 7-year covenant with the nation of Israel. But he can't get in the temple, because every time he does for the 3.5 years, the two witnesses are sending all these plagues and keeping him from getting in there. And so finally, he probably sends his minions and different people. So finally, toward the end of the 3.5 years, he says, well, I'm going to do this myself. So the Antichrist himself goes against the two witnesses. They kill him in the head with fire. And so then Satan takes him, heals his deadly wound, resurrects him as a beast, because I don't think he has the power to have a man. God is the one who made man a living soul. So what he does is he resurrects him as a beast. And then he goes then, as Revelation 11 says, and goes against the two witnesses. And because it's time, the 3.5 years is up, then God allows the beast to kill the two witnesses, and then he can then go into the temple and declare himself to be God and set up the image of the beast. And then he says, okay, now that I've shown that I'm the God of all gods and this Israel God is no good, I defeated him, well, now I'm going to scrap the Israel God covenant, the Mosaic law, and now I'm going to worship the true God, which of course is me, but I'm going to do it through the God of forces. So that's why you have that change halfway through and all that stuff that's going on there. So let's write down some verses here to explain all this. So what we've got then, when he says, going back to Isaiah 10 and verse 11, shall I not, as I have done in Samaria and her idols, so do to Jerusalem and her idols? Verse 10, as my hand hath found the kingdoms of the idols, in whose graven image did excel them of Jerusalem and of Samaria. The Assyrian apparently is able to defeat all the nations except for Judah and Jerusalem, because God is with them. Similarly, the Antichrist cannot take over Israel because he can't get into the temple because God has two witnesses keeping him out. Then, eventually, the Assyrians are destroyed by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians are able to get and destroy the temple and take Judah captive. Similarly, in the last half of the tribulation period, the Babylonian, the Antichrist, as the beast, is able to kill the two witnesses, get into the temple, set up the abomination of desolation, and be the one world ruler. So what he's saying there in verses 10 and 11 is, the Assyrian says, I've done these things to all the kingdoms. Can't I do it to Jerusalem as well? And the answer is no, because God doesn't let you. But as a beast, as the Babylonian, for the last half of the tribulation period, he can. Or in the near fulfillment, the Assyrians can't do it, but the Babylonians can under Nebuchadnezzar. So what I'm going to do for verses 10 and 11 is I'm going to write down the scriptures that we covered here. Daniel 11, verses 31 through 38. So I'm going to say Daniel 11, 31 through 38. Antichrist worships God of forces. So that's our first one. Then our other one was 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4. 2 Thessalonians 2, 4. Cannot get in temple until defeat of two witnesses. And then I'm going to write for that one Revelation 11 and verse 7. Okay, Revelation 11 and 7. So I got Daniel 11, 31 through 38, and Antichrist worships God of forces. 2 Thessalonians 2, 4, cannot get in the temple until he defeats the two witnesses. And Revelation 11, 7 shows that. Or he does that halfway through the tribulation period. That's why you don't have the image of the beast and the mark of the beast and the one world rulership of the Antichrist until halfway through the tribulation period, because he can't defeat the God of Israel. And of course, he never really does defeat the God of Israel. The God of Israel just allows him to kill the two witnesses. And if anybody's going to really truly look at things, they'll see the two witnesses resurrected by God and say, oh, well, I guess God, if he has the power to resurrect, then God really just let that happen. And of course, you go to Scripture and you find out God told you all along what would happen. Okay, so now Isaiah 10, verse 12. Isaiah 10, verse 12. You think we're going to finish the chapter today? No way. Wherefore it shall come to pass that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks. So that is Jesus' second coming. I'll just write second coming here, when it talks about whole work. So he does the first part, first half First half, 144,000 saved. That's Revelation 7. Revelation 7. Second half equals rest of Israel of God. Rest of Israel saved. That's the remnant of her seed. That's found in Revelation 12. I should really keep the bookmark in Revelation because that's where I'm going to for a lot of this. Revelation 12 and verse 17 mentions the remnant of her seed. Revelation 12, 17. So there's a saving of the first part of Israel, the 144,000, through the witness of the two witnesses, and the beginning of sorrows, the first half of the tribulation period. And then there's the salvation of the rest of the lost sheep of the house of Israel during the last half of the tribulation period. That's the remnant of her seed. So when he has gotten all Israel saved, the Israel of God, Romans 11:26, Galatians 6:16, when he's got all of the Israel of God saved. Wherefore, so Isaiah 10:12, wherefore it shall come to pass that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks. So it's the fruit, which means it's not just him, but it's really the whole thing. And I think of Revelation again, but you didn't think I was going there. Revelation 18, or really Revelation 19 and verse 20 and 21. Basically, all those gathered at the valley of Armageddon, the beast, the false prophet, and those who took the mark and worshiped the image of the beast. So Revelation 19, Revelation 19 verses 20 and 21 is when he does this. So it's not just the Antichrist, but the fruit is those who followed his eternal security program, took the mark, bowed down to the image of the beast. Verse 13, for he saith, by the strength of my hand I have done it, and by my wisdom, for I am prudent, and I have removed the bounds of the people, and have robbed their treasures, and I have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. So you notice he says, I have done it by my wisdom, I am prudent, I have removed the bounds of the people, and have robbed their treasures, and I have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. So he has 4 I have statements. Then you could go just a couple chapters over to Isaiah 14, and we'll see about his father, the devil. What did he say? Isaiah 14, verse 13. Isaiah 14, verse 13. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So you've got 5 I will statements. Isaiah 14, verses 13 and 14. So 4 I have statements, Antichrist. 5 I will statements, Satan. And that's Isaiah 14, verses 13 and 14. So he claims that he's done it by the strength of his hand. Remember, it is verse 5, O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. The only reason he gets that power that he does is because God allows him to do so. And if he turns to God, I mean, at least before he is killed by the two witnesses, I believe he could still be saved. I mean, why can't the Antichrist believe the gospel of the kingdom and be saved just like any other Jew, right? Of course, he's not going to do it. But God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But what he does is he's lifted up in pride, just like you think of Lucifer. He was perfect in wisdom and beauty, but then he corrupted himself by in his iniquities, and he corrupted the heavens there. And so the Antichrist does the same on the earth. Lucifer could have been the anointed cherub that covered God's throne, could still be up there if he decided not to rebel. The Antichrist, God's rod of his anger, God gives him unique powers that very few people have, and yet he doesn't give credit to God for that. Also notice it says there in Isaiah 10 verse 13, "For he saith, by the strength of my hand I have done it, and by my wisdom, for I am prudent, I have removed the bounds of the people." I'm going to write, that's very important, removed the bounds of the people. Remove the bounds of the people equals one world ruler, no nationalism. When God made man, he set 3 divine checks on man's sin nature. He didn't do it when he made man because he didn't have the sin nature yet. But he makes marriage, he makes free will, marriage. Well, he gives man free will, and the 3 divine checks against the free will to keep man from destroying himself. First, he gives marriage and family, which is basically kids. Marriage and kids. So your spouse keeps you from doing stuff, and your kids keep you from doing stuff. Again, you're still going to do sin nature, but to get where you would destroy yourself and all the people, you have marriage and family. And like Sodom and Gomorrah, well, when they get wholly given over to homosexuality, there goes the marriage with the opposite sex, and there goes the kids. You can't have kids when the parts don't match. So they've gotten rid of marriage and family completely. So God says, I got to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. The world was like that in the days of Noah. And then the world gets bad like that in the days of Nimrod. And so then God says, okay, what I need to do then is create a 3rd check against man's free will, and that is nationalism. And so that has worked. Now, the first 2 checks were in place for 2,000 years. Then it only took about 500 years until you get to where where God creates nationalism. So for 2,500 years, this world existed without nationalism. And now for the last 3,500 years, we've had nationalism. And pretty soon here, when the Antichrist comes in, he's going to overthrow nationalism. And you can see that stuff already. But the thing that created nationalism was the confounding of the languages. It's not a coincidence that one of the programs that's used to learn languages is called Babel. Because Babel is confusion. It's where God confounded the languages. So it's like the reversal of Babel. And you've got the technology today where you can do that. I've heard of, they've got headphones now where, let's say, I know English, that's all I know. And you know Spanish, and that's all you know. Well, I can get these headphones and this microphone here, and basically the way I understand it, the way they've got it now is this other person can speak Spanish into that microphone, and then I hear what you said in English in the headphones that I'm wearing. And I would assume it could go the other way as well. So then the other person could be wearing headphones. I could speak in a microphone. So I speak in a microphone English, and the other person hears Spanish. They speak into a different microphone. They speak Spanish, and I hear English. So right there, you've gotten rid of the language barriers. Now you got to have these devices, but you know what? If you have today, they have tracking devices in these phones that people. I don't have a smartphone, I have a dumb phone. But if I had a smartphone, they could track everywhere you go and everything. Well, the idea is if they could take the chip of the smartphone and they can implant it in your brain, then they can control you that way. And then they can use that technology to where now you've got implanted in your brain the ability to understand and all languages. Because you've got the technology, the chip technology in there to do the translation for you. You don't have to have the microphone and the headphones. That'll be antiquated, out of date. You just have it right there with that chip implanted in your brain. they're already doing that with the mRNA stuff that they're doing. They're trying to get people used to that with the jabs that they do. So then if they get that mRNA technology in there, eventually you won't mind having a chip in there. Oh, what's the chip? Well, it's the mark of the beast. Be there in your forehead or in your right hand. So there you go. That's how he removes the bounds of the people. It gets rid of that last check. So if we get rid of marriage by people just sleeping around however they want, it's just a recreational thing, and then they have homosexuality, you push that agenda so far, then what it does is it gets rid of marriage and family, and then when the time is right, then institute the mark of the beast, and he's removed the bounds of the people. One world ruler, no nationalism, language barrier, I'm going to write language barrier removed with chip implanted, and then I'm going to write in parentheses mark of beast. Mark of beast. Okay, so Isaiah 10, we're almost out of time, huh? Isaiah 10:13, for he saith, by the strength of my hand I have done it, by my wisdom, for I am prudent, and I have removed the bounds of the people, and have robbed their treasures, and I have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. Rob their treasures goes right along with that. Because if you can't take the mark, you also can't buy or sell. So that's how he robbed the treasure. So I'm going to write again, in parentheses, mark of beast. He controls the world economic system. So he robs their treasures. You know, if I have, let's say I have $1 billion, and then I say, well, take the mark. I don't want to take the mark. Okay, well, the only way you can buy or sell is if you got the mark. So all that $1 billion he had, it's just fiat money. It's just made up money. So it's zero now. It's gone. Bye-bye. So that's how he robbed their treasures. In the same way, he removed the bounds of the people and robbed their treasures, both with that mark. And I put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. And that's through the image of the beast. Because if you go against me, if you won't bow down to the image of the beast, oh, well, he's got AI technology and he can just cut your head off. So that's how he put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. He puts down the people who won't go along with the program. Verse 14, and my hand hath found as a nest the riches of the people. So again, that's the idea is he's got, his hand is the nest. So he's got the riches of the world in his hand because he got the whole world in his hands. That was written about God. But temporarily anyway, the Antichrist has that. And because he controls the world economic system. So, and my hand hath found as a nest the riches of the people, and as one gathereth eggs that are left, have I gathered all the earth, and there was none that moved the wing, or opened the mouth, or peeped. So, you think of that. One gathers eggs. So he's talking about the nest, the riches of the people, and now he's like a hen. If you go over to Matthew 21, oh, I'm not going to Revelation. Wow, fancy that. Matthew 21, I'm sorry, Matthew 23, or is it Matthew 21? I think it's Matthew 23. Matthew 23, verse 37. Matthew 23:37, after the indictment of the Pharisees, he says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. The idea there is that when the hen has eggs, it sits on the eggs to keep them warm and to a point where they won't die. And so then when they're hatched, then they're these little chickens. And there's a lot of dangers out there. I mean, they could very easily get squashed by something or somebody, or get injured and die very easily. So then, when they're little chickens, so when they're eggs, they're in the nest. She sits on them, and then when they're little chickens, little chicks, then she keeps them under her wings to keep them warm, to keep them safe from the wind and the cold and the elements and the foxes and all the things that can be out there to try to steal them, to kill them, so that she keeps them safe. And Jesus says, that's what you're like. You're like these little chickens, and I want to keep you safe. But the problem is they won't come to him. Who do they go to? The Antichrist. And the Antichrist keeps them safe, although he doesn't really keep them safe, just temporarily. Peace and safety at first, but then sudden destruction comes upon them at Jesus' second coming. So, he's one, gathereth eggs that are left, have I gathered all the earth, there is none. And then when it says none that moved the wing or opened the mouth or peeped, the idea is I've gathered all of these people under my wings, and no one, I have such power and I'm so great that no one can move the wing. And of course Jesus will at the end of the tribulation period and destroy all those who have come under the protection of the Antichrist, which happens at Armageddon. But at least while he's ruling, he says no one can stop me. The idea there. So I'm going to write Matthew 23:37. I'm going to write Matthew 23:37. Jesus wanted to do this for Israel. Matthew 23:37. Okay, now verse 15. Isaiah 10, verse 15. Shall the axe boast itself against him that heweth therewith? Or shall the saw magnify itself against him that shaketh it? As if the rod should shake itself against them that lift it up? Or as if the staff should lift up itself, as if it were no wood? In other words, what he's saying is, going back to verse 5, the Assyrian is the rod of mine anger. So he thinks he's great, that no one can move the wings. I've got everybody. I've conquered everybody. I've removed language barriers. I've removed riches to where I've got all the riches. I control all the technology. And they're all under my wing. And no one can stop me. And so God says, wait a minute here. You're not in control. Remember verse 5, you are the rod of mine anger. If I'm chopping down a tree, the axe can't say, hey, look at me, I chopped down that tree. No, you're just a tool that I used to chop down the tree. So if the Assyrian, the Antichrist, is the rod of mine anger, God says, just like the axe can't boast itself, or the saw can't boast itself, or the rod can't boast itself, and the staff can't boast itself, you can't do that either. So I'm going to write Antichrist just a tool. Antichrist has no power. Antichrist has no power. He is just a tool. Verse 16, therefore shall the Lord of hosts. So he's showing he's the one that's powerful. He's over the host of all the army of heaven there. Therefore shall the Lord of hosts, send among his fat ones leanness, and under his glory he shall kindle a burning like the burning of a fire. And the light of Israel shall be for a fire, and his Holy One for a flame. And it shall burn and devour his thorns and his briars in one day. So he's going to send among his fat ones leanness. So that is what happens at the second coming. And then under his glory he shall kindle a burning like the burning of a fire. And that fire then is where Matthew 3, John the Baptist talks about he shall baptize you with fire. And it talks there, it says in Matthew 3 and verse 11 that he would baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire, whose fan, so Jesus' fan, is in his hand, and he will thoroughly purge his floor and gather his wheat into the garner, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. So that's the fires of hell. So basically, when he sends leanness, and then under his glory he kindles a burning like the burning of a fire. So, and then the light of Israel shall be for a fire, his Holy One for a flame. It shall burn and devour his thorns and his briars in one day. That then is the day of his coming. And the thorns and briars, as we've said before, is a type of the curse of sin. And so it shows that, he thinks, the Antichrist thinks that he's got all this greatness and all this wealth and all this. But compared to what God has, what the Antichrist has, the greatest riches of this world are just like thorns and briars. They're worthless. They're not worth anything. So I'm going to write verse 16. I'm going to write second coming of Jesus. Fire, I'm going to write equals hellfire. Fire equals hellfire. So verse 17, the light of Israel shall be for a fire, his Holy One for a flame. It shall burn and devour his thorns and his briars in one day. Thorns equals type of sin nature. So equals things of this world. Things of this world. And then verse 18, shall consume the glory of his forest and of his fruitful field, both soul and body. Both soul and body. And that reminds me of, let's see if I can find it. Is it Mark 8? Mark. Well, Mark 8 verse 36 says, what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? That's not the verse I was looking for. It's probably over in Matthew. Here, I'll find it, hopefully. That's not what I'm looking for. It's not the word fire when Jesus said it. How about hell? They say that. Okay, here it is, Matthew 10. I almost went to Matthew 10. Now I am going to Matthew 10. No, almost about it. Matthew 10, Jesus says, verse 28, Matthew 10, verse 28, fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. So, the Antichrist, halfway through the tribulation period, will say, bow down to the image of the beast. If you don't do it, I'll kill you. And he can behead people, and he can destroy their body. But then, Jesus, if they believe the gospel of the kingdom, and that's why they didn't bow down to the image of the beast, then Jesus will resurrect them, and they'll have eternal life. So he can't touch their soul. But God, when he comes to destroy the Antichrist, he won't just kill their body like he did with, like the Antichrist did with those who wouldn't bow down to the image. But he will also destroy the soul. So Matthew in hellfire. So Matthew 10 verse 28 tells you that. So where it says there, Isaiah 10:18, shall consume the glory of his forest and of his fruitful field, both soul and body. What I'm going to write, Antichrist can destroy body. God can destroy soul and body. And then I'm going to write Matthew 10 verse 28. Matthew 10 and verse 28 there. And then it says verse 19, and the rest of the trees of his forest shall be few, that a child may write them. So I think what it's saying is, a child, the idea of it is a child. Think of somebody like Stephen King, let's say. I mean, he writes these big novels, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and an adult writer has spent many years practicing to the point where he can write big hundreds of pages or 1,000-page, and he can write pages and pages. But a child, if a child is to write a book, his understanding is very limited. So it's going to be he's not going to write a big Stephen King novel. It's going to be a short book with short words, and it's hard to describe. He doesn't have the vocabulary, the wisdom, and everything to write an adult type book because he's a child. So when it says, the rest of the trees of his forest shall be few, that a child may write them, the idea there is that God is going to bring the Antichrist says over there in verse 13, by the strength of my hand I have done it, by my wisdom I am prudent, I have removed the bounds of the people, robbed their treasures, I have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. In other words, he says he has all power, he's the God of gods, he's got all the riches, all the glory, and all this stuff. And God says, man, I'm going to destroy you and your kingdom so badly that you're just going to have a few trees left, and so few that a child could write it and give you full understanding of what's left, because it's just so few. It's real easy to describe. It's so easy to describe your wealth by the time I get through with you that a child can do it, because you basically will have nothing. So a child, basically what it says here, verse 19, Antichrist will have nothing. Okay, so then in verse 20, it's going to start talking about the remnant, and we're out of time. So we're going to stop right there. So just like I thought, I didn't get through Isaiah 10. So Isaiah 10, and we got to come up with the title here, Isaiah 10, verses 1 through 19. And I'm hoping, I don't know if it'll work, but I noticed chapter 11 is 16 verses, and chapter 12 is 6 verses. So maybe next week I can finish in 2 messages chapter 10 and get through chapter 11 and 12. I know that may be pretty ambitious, but maybe it's possible. So then I'd have 12 lessons and 12 chapters. Anyway, that's what I'm hoping for, because I really want to try to stick. I mean, it's going to take 66 lessons doing 1 chapter each time, so I'd rather stick with not taking longer than that. So, okay, so what are we going to call all of this? Verses 1 through 19. A lot of this is the Antichrist, and what he does basically in the first half, but then the second half of the tribulation period as well. So then verse 20 is going to start the remnant. So I guess we could say but then, God is the one who allows this to happen. He's the rod of mine anger. So, we could say Antichrist. God uses Antichrist to save Israel. But then we're going to see the remnant in verse 20. So this really is about the Antichrist. So I guess we could say Isaiah 10 verses 1 through 19. Antichrist. God uses Antichrist for his glory. I like that. That'll make people stop think, what? God uses Antichrist for his glory. Dear Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the tremendous understanding that the Holy Ghost gives us. Help us, Lord, to not follow Satan's lie program that he's doing today. Help us, Lord, to trust in your word and follow that, and let God's love come through us as we live by the faith of the Son of God. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thanks for joining us. And next Monday, we'll attempt to finish chapter 10, start in verse 20, and maybe in 2 lessons get all the way through chapter 12. That's going to be the goal. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.